the top 3 places that you can safely and legally park living in your car. That's what I want to talk about in this video. For the past 2 years, I've lived out of my car. I've traveled up and down the East Coast. Started in New Jersey. That's where I lived. I traveled up and down, and now I live in Florida. And what I can tell you, my experience, and you may have your own experience. I have to put the contingency that every town, every city, every part of the world has different rules and regulations. These are just in general speaking terms. The number one place that you could safely and legally park living in your car would be a rest area / truck stop. A rest area is usually found on the side of a highway, usually about once every hour, hour and a half. Along any major highway, you're going to have a rest area or a truck stop that you can safely and legally park. Some of them do have restrictions on time. Some of them have 3-hour park limits. Some of them have 8-hour park limits. And just like anything, even though you're allowed to safely and legally park there and rest and sleep, it's meant for that. It's not meant for living out of. It's meant for occasionally stopping and sleeping there and resting. Like anything could be abused, and if you were there repeatedly, it could become an issue. And there could be some safety issues. Have I ever had a safety issue? I've had a couple. One time I had someone strung out on drugs or alcoholic knock on my window in Georgia around 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. Nothing happened, but it could have. And a few times cops have knocked on my door at a rest stop just to basically say the time limit was up. And that does happen, but they were fine with it. They just said, look, once you wake up, we just ask that you go. So that's what will happen in most cases. I've really never abused it and got in trouble or anything like that. But even if you don't abuse it, and even if you're there for just one night, they patrol. State troopers patrol truck stops, whether they're on a parkway, a major highway, or turnpike. They patrol them, and sometimes they have individual security officers that patrol them. So they are monitored because they could become dangerous, and so law enforcement tries to monitor them so they are safe. So it's like a give and take, right? So you have law enforcement and security officers monitoring those areas so that they don't become crime-ridden and dangerous, so that people can safely and legally park and sleep as they travel about. But also, it's not a haven for setting up camp and staying there indefinitely. But I definitely would say that rest areas and truck stops, contingent upon, the parameters, the hours you could stay there or whatever, are a huge asset living in your car. And they're a huge thing I used, especially in the beginning of my journey. And that was like my number one go-to spot, because I knew that I wasn't like infringing upon anyone or doing anything wrong. I just had to be mindful of the times I stayed there, how long it was. And sometimes when you fall asleep, you drift off and you forget how long, you'd be there for 7 hours, and it's a 3-hour stop rest limit. But they don't bother you for the most part. The number 2 place I would rate as a safe and legal spot that you could park for overnight would be a Walmart. Walmarts are still up there as one of the safe havens for RVers or people who are living out of their car or van. There has been recently, more of an attention, more of restriction on that, because it has been abused in some areas. But I would say it's still overall, in many places, you have to check your own. It all varies on Walmart to Walmart. It's still a safe, legal place to park for the most part. I mean, put everything in quotation marks. But I think in your arsenal, that's right up there. I think that's number 2. I think number 1 is rest areas and truck stops. I think number 2 is Walmarts for one night. I see people camp there for several nights in a row. So it's all going to depend on how you want to approach it. It's all going to depend on the area and the store manager. Everyone has a different way. The best advice always for all of these is, arrive late at the evening, leave early in the morning, and be respectful to your environment and don't abuse anything. That's always the best advice pretty much for everything. And then the final thing that I would mention is free campgrounds. Because I'm trying to make this video centered around free areas that you could safely and legally park. Of course, if you paid, you could pay for a campground. You can rent parking space somewhere, or work out an arrangement with someone where you pay them a fee. But there are free campgrounds. Usually, in my experience, and it's more in the southern states and the western states of the United States. There are some in northern states, but because of the weather, it's very hard to get that all year round. The problem with free campgrounds are they're in the middle of nowhere. They're usually at least an hour or so away from populated areas, Starbucks, or any type of job that you may have to go to. It's going to be a little bit out there. But free campgrounds are accessible. What I've experienced you have to do with them, though, is you still have to file for permit depending on what government agency runs them, because they're usually run by a state, county, or federal government, and they're there for their public use. They're part of, public owns them. But there's limitations. And usually there's 8-day or 14-day stay limits. And they usually have a certain limit you could stay in each particular campground for the year. You have to apply for a permit online, and then you're issued a camping permit, and then you stay there and you post your permit on your dashboard. In Florida, it's ran by the water management districts in Florida. In the western states, it's run by the Bureau of Land Management. But it's the same premise in many cases, whether you go online or whether you have to register at some of them may have a campground host and a registration office. Either way, even though it's free, you still have to give information so they can document who's in and out, how long people stay, which is, again, part of a safety precaution, because you know who's there, how long they're there. If something happens, there's a tracking of people. And that's actually a good thing that you want. There are areas that you don't have to do any of that. Dispersed camping in forests, where you pretty much just go to different public lands and you can park in the middle of nowhere in a forest. I'm not into that. I don't think I've ever done that. I've drove through a couple of them. I didn't feel at peace with that. I mean, I feel more at peace sleeping at a truck stop, rest stop, or a Walmart than I do in the middle of nowhere in the woods. But that's just me. Everyone's different. These are my thoughts. This is my experience on safe, legal parking, in quotation marks. Nothing's 100% safe, and you have one bad experience and it's horrible. All these have different legal parameters that you'd have to research on your own, depending on your specific area. So I don't want to give misinformation, but in general speaking terms, the number one is going to be a rest stop or a truck stop for one night. And certainly you could leave for several days, then come back. I mean, you mix it up, but for one night, that's the best, the most readily available throughout your travels. Number two is Walmarts. They've cracked down a little bit more on them, but they're still out there. And number three is some type of free camping, whether it's something you have to register online for public special permit use, or whether it's something that there's a forest that you could disperse camp. And those would be my top three places that you would use, and that you can use. Like everything, I mean, just use the internet. Google is your friend. And there's a lot of different camping apps and forums online that can guide you. But it can be done. It may cause a little bit of movement, but it can be done. And safe travels. Good luck on your journey.